Welcome, everyone. So today we wanted to, we definitely want to cover as much as we can in this hour. And of course, the chat line I'll watch as best I can so we can take in some questions as we go along. But Jordy, what I thought we would like to do to start with is we're going to cover off some of the last week. We've gone through another week of dealing with the new legislation. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the upcoming changes that we think might happen and might help us, and then talk a little bit about some more estate planning tools. First of all, Jordy, can you just, you and I both had done them already. Can you give us a little overview of your video wills experience so far?
Sure. So I've now done it in 4 different ways. In my backyard, so it's a classic way. Sent it out once for a client to sign with 2 of their, they had their neighbors. They lived in a condo, so they did it remotely. Then I did one by incorporation by holograph will, because it was a more complicated situation and they didn't have witnesses. And now I did it by video. So just to take you through the way I did it. So we sent them the original, or the final version of the will by email, which they printed out. And we put in in the actual document, we put in the footer a description so that we knew we were working with the same document. So we had the name of the document plus the date and the time, so that we could identify that we were all working on the correct document. And on our blog, I think we have a link to the Microsoft Office website that tells you how to do that. So that, I think, is important, and it's going to be important even more potentially going forward. So we could identify that. So then what we did is we set a time for us to join on a Zoom conference. So my client was on Zoom. My son, who happens to be 18, or great, he's 21, but he's over 18. We sat in my office right here, and we followed that checklist that you developed to make sure that we signed it correctly. So we made sure that Zoom worked. We could hear each other. We put our recorder on. I didn't ask the client to show me each initial page, to be honest with you. What I did is I had them identify it. Then I watched them as they initialed each page. And Spencer was beside me, so we were both here. And then and then before they signed the last page, I had them lift up the last page so I could see it. And then I instructed them to sign it, and I could see them signing it. And then once they signed it, I had them lift it up to me again, just so I could see that. And I also had them acknowledge that that was their signature, in case there was some argument that I didn't see them sign it. I did see them, they did acknowledge it in our presence. So, so that's what I did. And at that point, it was over. And then I had my assistant arrange for them to courier it to me. And then on a Tuesday, I got it actually, and did my first completion. And so hopped back on the Zoom. Again, we had another appointment. This one was quicker. I held up the document to show them that I was witnessing the same document that they had just signed, because their initials were on it, obviously. And before I initialed each page, before I got to the last page, I held that one up and I said, this is the page I'm going to sign. And they said, that's my signature again. Just I figured, why not? and then I signed it. And then Spencer went through the same process. And as I said to them at the end, well, that's it. We now have a valid will, we hope. And so that's the way the process worked. And yeah.
So Jordy, let's just talk about that, because you raised an important point in the testimonial clause and the dating of the will. Last week we were asked about this. When is a will effective, and what are we doing on the testimonial clause? It's a week later, and in this world that seems like a month. What's your thoughts on that? You're on mute.
No, I was just turning up my volume just a bit so I could hear. Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've got a whole bunch of questions. And if you've emailed me with this question and I haven't got back to you, it's because I'm still thinking. So I'm just, I think I wouldn't change necessarily the testimonial clause unless it's different, unless it doesn't reflect the truth, which I think it does still reflect the truth, which is that the testator signed the document in our presence, and we were both here at the same time, et cetera. So that I think is accurate. I'm just worried about putting in too much detail in the testimonial clause. But, you know, I'm not sure, you know, some people have emailed me saying, well, I'm going to put in, you know, that it was present by audio, video, communication technology, pursuant to the official order number, blah, blah, blah. I mean, yeah, it's a judgment call on that. I don't think, I'm a little reluctant to do that, but I'm not sure why. I just don't think it's necessary. And the proof of this, the proof of the fact that it was executed properly in accordance with whatever law is necessary, you know, will be supported by the affidavit of execution. I just want to show one thing, if I can, Ian, about our Succession Law Reform Act. Can you see the screen here? I hope. Ian, can you see the screen? Yeah. So Section 4 of the Succession Law Reform Act actually describes confirms that there's no specific form of attestation that's necessary where witnesses are required. There was a lot, and this is not actually an unusual provision in the Commonwealth. So the idea that you know, that attestation clause has to be specific and referred to, et cetera. Not sure. I think our Act does help us out on that front. The real important issue, I think, is whether do we put the date beside the date that the witness signed. That I think I'm more supportive of, in the sense that then you can identify on its face when it was formally, you know, last witnessed, last subscribed to. That I'm comfortable with. I'm not sure, again, it's required. The court, you know, maybe they will require evidence, but that's what the affidavit of execution is. If you go to a bank, let's just play this out for a second. You start dealing with this will without probate because you don't need it for some reason. You know, is somebody going to raise this as an issue? Well, if somebody's not raising the issue of probate, then they're probably not going to raise the issue of, you know, whether this was executed properly. And if they do, you have the affidavit of execution. So, yeah, and there can be, you're on mute, Ian.
Okay, sorry, Jordy, can we just break that down?
Sure.
So what are you suggesting we say then on the like, I hear you, we don't need to add new words to the attestation clause, and I agree with that view as well, for sure, because I think I actually think it's unnecessary for third parties. It confuses third parties, and the verification is done by the affidavit of verification. So a bank doesn't need to know how it was signed. Only person who needs to know is the registrar, in my view. But what are you saying on the dating? And are you saying that once it comes back, is it the last person standing that dates it? What are we dating? How are we dating this?
Well, what I would say is there's a date that it was signed. That is in my, you know, that I would leave in it. This was signed, you know, on this date. What I'm doing is I'm going to put in the date that the witness signed. So I did that on the one that did, and I just, under where it says, you know, witness signature, I signed it and I'm putting the date. Yeah, that's, is it strictly necessary? I don't think so.
So just so I understand, it comes back to the witness, it's done a video, comes back to the witness, and you're saying at that point, when the witness signs, the witness is witnessing, used to be you just witnessed and maybe printed your name and your address underneath it, but now you're saying that you would like to date the day the witness signs.
Correct.
All right. And so do you think that raises any concerns, though, coming back to my issue, is that is a little bit different looking will, and does it then, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we do need to address the attestation clause by saying something about video referencing, because a bank might say, well, why are there two dates?
Right. I mean, that's what that's indeed why I'm reluctant and I'm not sure. To be honest with you, I don't think there's an answer here that's 100% right. We don't know. You know, the reality is, if you don't put a date in, now let's just play that through. The bank's going to get it, and it may have been signed all on the same, may have been witnessed and subscribed to on the same date. It may not have been. The bank won't know, and maybe the bank won't care. And I don't think they should, to be honest with you. If they're accepting it without probate anyway, then whatever. Putting the date in does give rise to that. I go back and forth. I'm almost, you keep changing my mind for me.
I get it. And look, there's options here. So I think really at the end of the day, I'm sorry, I'm using the bank's a bad illustration because it's not really a bank. A bank may require a higher threshold. It's a question of, like a funeral home or something, or some, who's not taking the same scrutiny. All right. So choice at that point, and we'll sort of have to see how it goes. But on balance, my view is you don't change the attestation clause. You put the extra date in there. And that's why it's so important that you actually get the affidavit of execution done at the time, because then you can, if you do get any pushback, you say, here's the will and here's the affidavit of execution. So that is your answer, Mr. Funeral Home or whatever. But I think we sort of talked around that, and you're right. It's one that we're going to have to sort of struggle with. This is one of the questions on the chat is raising exactly this point. This is an issue that will be more live on powers of attorney, because the bank is likely going to see a probated will. So I think that's absolutely right. Where there's a different threshold supervision of the will, a bank is not as good an illustration. So I think we've sort of talked around that circle as well as we can, because there is no hard and fast answer, but I tend to be of the view that it's worth putting the second date on it to just make it more accurate and to follow the chain of events.
Yeah, now I go back to powers of attorney the other way, not putting a separate date on, because there's at that point we want to get it to be used. So, you know what I mean? If we put a date on it, it raises all kinds of questions. So I think it's a judgment call. I think, I think I'm going to go no date on POAs for the witnesses.
Okay, well, that's good. So, and that's helpful. You're right. And there's also a legislative reason for that too. We don't have the same subscribing language.
Right.
So, okay. So in summary, ideally we can date extra dates on the wills. Probably not such a big deal. Definitely a good idea to get the affidavit of execution done at the same time, just to help bolster any questions. And powers of attorney, because we definitely do not want to get dragged into a debate with third parties. Keep the date as it is, and then perhaps again, it may be worth. Would you think it's worth doing an affidavit of verification for powers of attorney?
Yeah, I think it's not a bad idea to have an affidavit of execution similar to the will affidavit for POAs. I think just in the back pocket sort of thing, to satisfy anybody if they asked for some proof that it was valid, or you had to give some a letter of authenticity or something, or validity, then you at least have that.
Okay, and we've got a link to the webpage on the form of those affidavits of execution, which I've actually used twice already this week, and it has been handy just to have that. And you're actually pulling it up right now. The form of that affidavit can be easily amended for powers of attorney as well.
Yes.
Okay. So let's just talk about directing. Another tool, you mentioned some of the tools that you've used this week alone. Can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts on what has been a tool that most of us haven't even thought of or used maybe less than a handful of times in our whole practice, is the ability under Section 4 to direct someone to sign your will. That's another sort of option that's available to us, and I know you've done a blog on this, and maybe, oh, you've got it up there, good. So maybe could we just spend a moment talking about this ancient concept, but the plain English is directing someone to sign your will.
Manuessus. And yeah, I mean, you don't see this very often. And I only have done it once, where the testator was unable for physical reasons to sign the will. And so you can, under the Succession Law Reform Act, I'll just show that to you. It's signed by some other person. This is 4 sub 1 sub A. It's a document signed by some other person by his or her direction. So that's the legislative authority for that. And it was more common where you had illiterate people who couldn't write their names. That's sort of where you see some of the old case law. But the idea is that the testator directs me to sign the will for him, and that's, as I said, allowed. The case law, there's not a ton of case law on this, but what the case law does say is that when I sign on behalf of the testator, I can either sign the testator's name or I can sign my name. And in that case, the testimonial clause must change because it wasn't signed by the testator. It was signed by the amanuensis and at their direction. So that has to change because the testimonial clause wouldn't be accurate. And so that's the one point about how that's signed. There is also case law about can that person also be a witness? And I think the case law is generally yes. And so it's a bit weird. And Professor Oosterhoff has a great section in his book about that and whether that makes sense, etc. Some legislation says that cannot be the case. I think Alberta's act says you can't be both a witness and the person signing at the direction of the testator. So, but our law is less clear. So that's how it would be done. And so the testator would direct you to sign. You'd sign. The other witness would watch and then witness that I signed at the direction of the testator. And that's how that would work.
Okay, that's great. Well, it's another option in the sort of arrow in the quiver. Can you just call up the choices now? And I just want to because you mentioned you'd used yourself this week several options for execution, and we have a sort of a list of them in terms of the options. And maybe let's just go over the options. So now, and because the next thing we want to talk about is a little bit are there going to be other options coming forward? And I want to just spend a minute on that. But to date, what seems to be working with signing wills with your clients? The obvious number one is the one you talked about. That is through the glass, outdoors, those conventional will signing, but in a bit of an unconventional environment. That's the easiest one, and the one that I guess as much as possible we'd like to go to, just because we know that was working for sure, and we don't need a lot of checklists for that. Everyone is still in the presence of, and all of those sorts of tests are met. Can you just describe briefly, just as an overview, on the other options, so that we've got a sense of what options we can consider with our clients, and then we'll talk a little bit about maybe some future options.
So you've described the first one. The second one is a standard holograph will, where the client just writes out their instructions on their own. The third is where they have a formal will that you sent them, a draft in essence, not going to be validly signed, but then they incorporate that that formal document into a holograph will that just says, I hereby incorporate by reference the will that is the type document that I've identified as Schedule A, for example. And there's some risks with that, and that's sort of outlined in our blog, but that's another option. Then there's the option that I've been through, where you have it by video. And that's really where we're at now. And then the witness, then there's the one where it's also by video, but it's by direction to you to sign on their behalf. And the advantage of that is you don't have to courier that document around necessarily if you've got all the witnesses in the room, in the one room, and then the testator by video direction to do that. So to sign on their behalf. So that's the other, those are the options I think we have right now.
So as far as I can see, one of the problems with all of these options still continues to be the health issue that is attached to the fact that the virus can survive on paper. And certainly, and I know that from my own experience talking to some people this week, but also taking calls and emails, there is a movement afoot to try to figure out if there's a way we can actually do wills in counterpart in this COVID period. And I think I can safely say that all the powers that be are looking at that option very carefully and as a viable option, but obviously to be done in a way that mirrors the concerns that arise out of the counterparts approach. But a counterparts in theory, of course, Jordy, tell me a little bit of your thoughts about what in theory a counterparts will would look like, and just generally what would that idea entail?
Yeah, so I think under the current legislation, right, I don't think it contemplates counterpart, so that's why we have that currying around thing. Well, counterpart would mean that each of the three parties, the testator, the two witnesses, are all signing at the relative same time, but on different documents. So the way I see this working, I guess, is that you would, again, make sure that the document is the same document that all three parties have. Again, marking the document with some identification, i.e. the name of the document, the date it was generated, and and the time even, so that we can be sure that we're all signing the same document that has a unique identifier. And then we get together on video, each with their own copy of that same document. The full copy, I would think, is necessary. I don't know, but at least let's assume that's the case. And then the testator would sign it. You'd watch the testator sign their copy. I would ask them, I guess, to hold it up to show us that they signed the one that we think we have, and then the next witness would subscribe their copy of that document, and then the next witness would subscribe their copy of the document. Now the document is the three copies all together. That's the will. Then you would have affidavits of execution that explain that. That's a little bit different, but you'd have unique ones, affidavits of execution to explain how that was done. It would be, put it this way, you're going to have more problems if you're trying to use that outside of the jurisdiction. But that's how I sort of see it, I guess.
All right, and what about the attestation clause? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think you'd have to explain that it was attested to and subscribed in counterpart, and that would be that you'd have to, I think. Well, you don't have to, but I think that's a good idea to change that attestation.
Yeah. Well, good. I mean, look, it's an important exercise to talk about now, because legislation moves quickly. If it does move quickly, we want to be ready for it. We've at least started to think about it. I can say that it's more than just an idea. It's very, very seriously being considered. So I can assure everyone on this call that if it does happen, we'll have essentially emergency webinar as fast as we can, just to talk through some of your preliminary thoughts on that, Jordy. So thanks so much. All right. Well, look, that's maybe forward looking, but it's always good to be looking forward in the sense that we now have a series of options, and we may have even more flexibility or options. And I call it options because the sanctity of a will is so crucial that, you know, whatever we're doing, we can't undermine the importance of the execution. It's been around for a long time for good reason. So I think all of these options preserve that dignity of the signature being scrutinized. Jordy, there's a question. Is there any reason witnesses can't sign electronically as long as the testator wet signs, since FLRA section 4.1c refers to in the presence of? Maybe you can just give me your preliminary thoughts, and I can tell everyone a little bit about some of the discussions that have been circulating around that whole idea.
Yeah, I don't think witnesses can witness electronically. That's my view. I think the Electronic Commerce Act, or I'm not sure I have the full proper name, but excludes wills, and that's my view. And I don't know how you would sort of deal with that from a probate point of view. I would not recommend that, in the sense that I think you're going to have trouble down the road if without sort of some court order that proves that, because they won't be proving that automatically. So you're going to be running into roadblocks, even if it's down the road found to be valid. I think you're going to you run a big risk.
Well, I agree with you 100%, and I think it's a great question because it illustrates the fact that we can only go so far with execution. Due execution has been preserved. They haven't come in with a substantial compliance solution or anything like that, which is not sure would be a solution anyway. But the reality is the ideas that we've been talking about and that we've been putting up on our webpage are all, in our view, strong defenses to the issues. So just coming back and as a follow-up on that, so I guess, and that's a great point, Robert, as well. And this is why we wanted to raise the counterparts clause, because this is really, all of these options, not all, the video option is not necessarily solving the health issue. And couriers are touching the document, whatever. Like the whole thing is leaving open issues that I think the video was trying to, bring in force to eliminate as much as they could. I think it's eliminated a ton of problems, but I do think this counterparts idea has got a lot of traction because it kind of closes the loop. Although it brings some new risk, it closes the loop on the health issue. So I think we're going to, as I say, my gut is we're going to probably see something in that regard, and it'll be soon. And if it is, we'll be all over it. So I'm just getting a question here. Can you speak to the need to have two separate affidavits of execution on a virtually witnessed will? I've been wondering whether one would suffice, as is the case now. So Jordy, that's a great question. I had one of those this week, so you go ahead.
So I think it depends on the circumstances as to whether you have both witnesses there in the same room at the same time to witness, to subscribe. So I think it's possible. So if you have the two witnesses there and you can say that we both were there, we both saw, the testator sign, et cetera, that's possible. There has to be evidence that there's an LSO member that is one of the witnesses. And so, but I do think it's possible to do that. Although, again, I don't know what's possible. Excuse me, because it's going to be up to the court, and I think it'll be easier if you have both affidavits. If the court says the other thing we have to point out, of course, is that the affidavit of execution right now is a court form, and the one we're proposing is clearly not a court form. We don't have that authority. Even Ian doesn't have it. Although I'm not sure, but
The phone call.
his wife does. Kirsten has that. Maybe that's how it happened. But so I think there is strength in numbers, though. If we're all using a similar form, there's going to be a great pressure on whatever body's going to satisfy the court about the form of the affidavit. That this is the one you should use. But I don't think it's, depending on the circumstances, it's not absolutely necessary, as long as everything that you need to prove that will is in the affidavit.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much. That was a great question. We're getting some good questions here about the counterparts. I can assure you that I forget there was at some point there was some sort of movement, wasn't there, Jordy? Was it the long? What was that?
Yeah, Patrick from Notice Connect was a driving force behind that. I don't think we need a petition. That's my sense at this point, but I think that concern is well known. Yeah.
So I think sure you can definitely take a look at the Notice Connect page, and I'm sure it deals with it. But as I say, I've already been in close dialogue with a bunch of people who are very anxious to address this counterparts issue. It's top of mind, and I don't think they need more of a nudge, but God bless you if you want to get involved. All right, do you have any concerns with using Zoom for client meetings, given the privacy problems with it?
Yeah, I personally don't have concerns. I think that the major concerns that were occurring were where a link was more public, and people were bombing the link and jumping on a call. So I think that's more of the issue. Certainly, I actually have had somebody jump on a Zoom call with me, but just an early client jumped on early, and I just had to block them. And you can do that using Zoom. I know that there's some suggestion that other platforms are safer. I haven't really seen where there's a huge breach, like a breach of it without you seeing the person, jump on. And if you take proper steps to block anybody else other than the people that you invite, your clients, I don't have a concern with it personally. And I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen certainly the Law Pro or the Law Society saying that that you shouldn't be using it. So
that's great. I'm of the same view. I'm using I'm doing a password now, attaching it, which I didn't do in the early stage, and which helps me. There's a protocol, you can Google it. There's a ton of protocols you can add to the Zoom settings that even give you more comfort if you like. But it's a great question. Patrick, thank you for jumping in on the conversation. He says that he's continuing his chats with the AG's office, and he's of the same view that things are under solutions well underway regarding counterparts. So one of the things I was wondering, Jordy, is, are we obligated, and Robert just asked, and I thought about this myself, are we obligated to provide the client with a copy of the video recording?
This is what I know about this. So a recording that you make, as I understand it, is like your notes. They're yours. And so I'm not sure you're obligated. That's something that's more a professional question, I think, for the Law Society. I I'm not sure I have a problem with it, but you know, if the client asks for it, I think, you know, I wouldn't have a problem.
No, and I agree, and I think you're absolutely right. It is more of a regulation question, but at the end of the day, you got to be proud of your recording, and if your client wants to see it and wants to know geez, what did I say? I mean, I did speaking of, I'm using a new app called Slack, which I highly recommend to everyone if you want to get involved in it, because it's a huge success. But it's a cool app for practice management tool. And the other day I had a little bunch of us lawyers sat around talking about some of the tricks and traps of Slack and how to use it. And I pressed record of it. It was a Zoom call, and I go back to it all the time now. It's like, oh yeah, here. So, and I was proud of that one. So anyway, okay, so let's circle back a little bit, because I guess at this point we've got a little bit of time. So I wanted to just feel free, people if are watching, to jump in with it's Slack. It's SLACK. Okay, right? I use it all day long. And it's a free app at some level, and then you can buy into more tools and stuff, as all these tend to do. But it's a workspace organizer that helps manage emails. Jordy, are you able to? Oh yeah, we've got the Office 365. Teams is excellent as well. This is just a perfect segue into the next point on technology. I know LawPro has been really at the forefront of making sure that we're aware of the technology options. And in the past, we've referenced the options that they've put forward, and they have a link to technology tools that we've referenced quickly. But are you able to call that link up? I didn't give you any heads up on this.
I will. Give me one sec as I search for it.
Because it just gives us a nice segue into the other area of the discussions, and we're going to run out of time, so we won't have an in-depth discussion. But there's a couple of things that sort of come to mind. One is, what are some of the trends that are happening out there in terms of problems and claims that are arising with wills lawyers? And number two is, what are some of the tools that we can use in this COVID environment? And I really am a strong believer that whatever, hopefully this ends soon, but whenever we come out of this, we're not coming back. We're going to be into more remote working and remote tools than ever. It's going to be hard to shake this, and nor should we. So, all right, you found the
I didn't find the technology listing. I will do my best to do that.
That's fine. I'll do that while you're looking.
Okay, if you don't mind that, and just you can Slack it to me.
You bet. I will Slack it.
Yeah. I think, though, if you can Slack that to me, I'd like to call that up, because it has some key points, I think, for us as lawyers about the use of technology. So that'd be great. But this is a LawPro's analysis of claims against lawyers in our area and for wills. And they have, they're increasing like this in the past 8 years. And that's no surprise to anybody in this area that you're going to see more claims. But what they often point out is that unlike any other area of law, the number one cause of errors is inadequate investigation. And that it's our problem. That, gathering the proper information from our clients is in some ways the hardest part of our job. And because one question leads to another question, leads to another question. But the errors are coming from not asking enough about assets, about ownership, about people in the family, about citizenship, and more information about different people, disabilities, and things like that. So that's the number one. The number two is, you see, is communication. That's not like other areas of law where communication is, did you report this out to the client necessarily, and did you cover yourself on warning about limitation periods and things like that. This is the idea that the client, that there's some gap between the understanding of the client and the understanding of the lawyer. And that's a real problem in our area, as you know probably better than anyone in the province, Ian. You know, the classic argument about a will challenge is that they didn't know and approve of the contents or lack capacity. Part of lacking capacity, when you get right down to it, is this will, does this represent their true wishes, and did they have the ability to form those wishes? And so, you know, that's the second thing. Errors of law, you know, there's, of course, everybody knows about the simple will that everybody wants. There's, you know, it may end up looking like a simple will, but that doesn't mean that the process was simple, because there's always these issues that arise. And so not knowing all of the issues, or even knowing them, but forgetting to ask about them, forgetting to speak to that issue, important. And then the idea that wills sit on people's desks, they take a while to get done, and then errors occur, as well as clerical errors. So that's the issue. I'm just trying to see if I've got Slack here, and I'm just gonna pull this over here just so, and I'm gonna try to find if I've got the Hull and Hull one.
I've got it here. I'm gonna forward to the page.
Can you forward it on eState, the Slack?
Now you're asking me to do stuff that
Anyway, while we...
You do it. I'm trying to do that right now.
This is a fine, finely tuned operation we got going on. So these are the errors. And how can technology solve some of these errors? That is something that Ethan and I have been working on for years. And, you know, we think that we've made some inroads on that. Regardless of this COVID issue, these are the errors that are occurring. So for those of us who are planning wills remotely, it seems that there's, you know, three options. One option, you just get on the phone with the client, and you in fact use a similar process to what you've been doing all along, which is, thanks, Ian. Let's see if Ian did this correctly. Oh, beautiful.
Slack came to the rescue.
So, can you guys see this? Ian, can you see that?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So the idea that we can use technology, and this is really a key, you've got to, when you're considering adopting technology, you got to give yourself time to learn it, how to use it. And you've got to be willing to do it. You have to be open to that concept, because it is not, regardless of whatever technology you're going to use, it's going to take some time, and it's going to require an investment of time, and it's going to require an investment of perhaps some money. I just think that we can't not use technology. Wills are not going to be the only industry or drafting wills that doesn't have technology. And so the time has come. And what we were pleased that Law Pro has indicated, you know, or at least refers to our product at Hull Estate Planner for planning wills and estates, because I think that that really software addresses those problems that that cause the errors. And I'm just going to show you, if I can, Ian, if you'd like me to, or do you want me to address any other technology first, Zoom or anything else?
No, go ahead. We're loving
it. All right. So the idea of gathering information about a client. So this is just the way we use it. So we use Zoom to generate these meetings and to hold these meetings, rather than being just on the phone. Being on the phone is probably the worst way of trying to gather the information from a client and being able to communicate properly with them. What our software does is, first of all, it gathers the information from the client by way of a questionnaire that the client can fill in. Ask them sort of the general information, ask them about their residency, but also prompts them to do you have any special circumstances, any vision issues or hearing issues or health issues? And then it asks, do you have a spouse, do you have kids? And gets an idea of what the family looks like. And then you can build out the family, with their information and that kind of stuff. So this is for the client, and also prompts them to, does this person have disability or financial or estrangement problems or those kinds of things. So the questions that we're supposed to be asking, the client is prompted even in this in this area in the questionnaire, and it asks them about their assets and do you have do you have real estate, do you have RSPs, do you have pets, do you have financial assets, do you have safety deposit box, media accounts, all those things that we should be gathering. And the bane of our existence is gathering this information, and if we can make it easier for clients to do it either online or in some other way, that's sort of where we're at. So the idea there is that we can gather the information in a little simpler way. Maybe Ian, you can address just for a second the idea of what kind of data we should be collecting from clients on assets.
Well, that's the big debate, right? And the case law has been giving us some mixed messages for many years on what is the nature and extent of the, when you get into a will challenge, what is the nature and extent of the expectations of the data you're to pull from the client? And I just think using this tool or other tools, getting more is better. And getting ideas about the nature and extent of liabilities is something as well that people don't often explore as deeply as you can. And so your questionnaire triggers it, but if the client, who typically aren't great about filling these out, doesn't give it to you, you need to follow it up with your own steps.
Right. And I'm just going to call up, if I can, just give me one moment here. And I'm just going to call up an example. And part of the issue is, there's the data collection, but then there's the idea of the communication. And if you just give me 1 second here, I'm just going to call it up on my screen. And the idea that you can explain concepts, difficult concepts to the client and they can watch and make decisions in a visual way. That's really what Hull Estate Planner is about. It's a client-driven piece of software. Sorry, I'm just getting in here. And it's funny, to some degree, it's relatively, there's a lot of questions to go through, and it's powerful because it's got, it does address a whole bunch of issues that we have. Let me just share my screen here. Sorry, guys. And thanks for your patience. So you should be able to see my screen right now. The idea that, you could have a complicated family here, but rather than just taking down information on your notes. So historically, the way you're probably doing it right now is the client is talking and you're writing your notes. How do you, John, Claire Dumpy, okay, spell that name out and you write it down and you're transcribing it. And then you're going to transcribe it again when you put it in the will. The great thing about sharing a screen, whether it's live, where the client is watching on a screen in your boardroom, or remotely on Zoom like you're watching right now, is when they tell me that this kid's name is Joe, and I call up Joe and I say, is that his real name? No, it's actually, Joseph. So I start typing Joseph, and I think I've got it right because they just told me his name is Joseph. And they say, oh, no, it's not with a PH, it's with an F. Okay, I'll get it right. And the client is constantly being able to check that what you're hearing is what they're saying. And I can't tell you how many times I'll start typing a name and they say, oh no, it's got, it's spelled differently. So that's one of the powers of the client being able to see what you're doing as you're doing it. Plus, you don't miss people, obviously. You've got the whole family there. It's easy to see. And the other thing is that the questions, when you're talking about Mitchell, you know, you're being prompted to ask about things, even if it's a 2-second question. Are there any special circumstances? No, they're not. So they don't reside with you? Oh, well, they do reside with me. Oh, okay, tell me about that. Well, they live with me, you know, and because so often, you know, a simple question is missed by a client, and it's not their fault. It's more, I think, our fault that we don't drill down. You know, are there any special circumstances? What does that mean to a client? So the idea that that a Hull estate planner does, you know, sort of make you ask those questions in more depth is an idea that's, I think, a good one. And then the whole idea that you can plan. So if the client is sitting here, you know, we often talk about what they have in their estate, but we never use the numbers when we're talking because we can't calculate them in our head. But the idea here is that estate is going to take account of the assets, the legacies, the tax, the probate tax, and help you demonstrate to the client what the impact of it is. So, for example, if you're planning a simple estate, you're taking the first scenario where the client is getting, you know, everything to the spouse. I'm just getting rid of a couple of things here, but you're up here and you're sitting there and you're talking to the client and you're saying, well, the home is joint. Okay, let's drag that in there. And the RSP has the spouse is designated as the beneficiary. You're planning it live. The client can watch and go back and forth with you and show you. And the other thing is that it's showing you that you've saved the client, you know, tax and probate tax just by doing this planning. And that's the idea of visualization, that as you develop the plan, you know, well, I want to leave $10,000 to my grandchildren, you know, and so you can build out the gift with the client being prompted. It's a live checklist that changes based on the circumstances. So they want to give, you know, $50,000 to each beneficiary, you know, and then you can ask the client, well, do you want that to be indexed? You know, how long? Well, I think let's do it till age, you know, 45. And you'll be like, well, maybe 45 is a little long for 50 grand. How about 25? Okay. And, you know, oh, but I want to give them half at, you know, 21. Oh, no problem. Let's give them half at 21. And you're building out the plan with them, and they're seeing it as you develop it. And it can be a very sophisticated, comprehensive, and you know, complex plan. You know, but then that you don't miss issues. So, you know, if I didn't put in a gift over, estate would warn me. You haven't provided for a gift over there. And so that's how visualization, I think, can really, you can see how powerful this is if you are a client trying to follow along with what you're doing. And that's the idea. The idea is that rather than the client talking and we taking notes and the client having no idea, quite frankly, what you're writing down, and whether you understood what they were talking about, and you have no idea really if they understood what you were talking about. This way, we're literally all on the same page. And addressing the idea of checklists and errors and missing points. You know, we all have checklists in our head. We're trying to remember everything we're supposed to ask our client. Well, estate helps us because it's going to tell us, look, you've given an asset to one beneficiary and made other beneficiaries residuary beneficiaries. You've got an income tax issue perhaps here. You've got property outside of Ontario, outside of Canada. So don't forget to deal with that. You've got a PCOR issue here. So, you know, even if you didn't remember to ask, oh yeah, they have a joint asset with one kid. You have a multiple wills point here. So, oh yeah, of course I wouldn't forget that. Great. But can you demonstrate to a client visually what the impact of using multiple wills would be? And by clicking a button here, I can show the client, well, if we use multiple wills, we're going to save you $23,000. You want to do that? No? Yes? Okay. So there's that power. But the greatest power, I think, is that before the client leaves that meeting with me, I say to them, this is your will in graphic form. Now, lawyers, we're words people. We only think that that's the only way to communicate, that's the best way to communicate, or that's the way we have to communicate. But there is visualization and graphics that help. And I say to the client, you know, here is what your will is going to look like. It's going to collect all your assets. We're going to have tax and probate tax, and you're going to give grandchildren some money, and then you're going to give away the residue. And the client can say, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. And they literally, rather than waiting 3 weeks for a draft written in a language that they don't understand, they can see what the will is going to be. And maybe, Ian, do you want to speak to the power or the importance of that kind of thing, or how you see it as a litigator?
Well, absolutely. And we're just running close to our limit here. So we got a couple questions we want to deal with. So obviously the tool is a tremendous tool. The saving the documents when you save them, the people talk about taking careful notes. Well, this is a illustration of this. All of this is saved. All of these questions having been asked and documented having been asked are a tool that is going to have a profound effect in any litigation situation, because you know, if someone says to me, I didn't carefully take instructions, it's going to be bloody hard to get over that hurdle, because the extent of the inquiry that has been made, first with the benefit of the intake through the checklist and the questionnaire, and then going through that visually with the client. And the other cool tool is that now, and I wasn't using it as much before, but now people don't mind. And so I'll often Zoom record the actual instructions and the intake. So I've got that in my file, and that's just another added documentation that you can't really, you know, at the end of the day, you can't beat this. And not that every case has got its own, but this is a tremendous strength in the tool. Now, the last thing I know you're doing, Jordy, is just showing how the document gets created. Maybe we take a minute on that, and then we just have 2 questions, and then we're going to wrap up.
Sure. So what I did while you were talking, Ian, was I generated the will that I'm going to charge $1,000 for. It generates in a Word document using your precedent, basically your template, although it can be amended. I amended your template a little bit because I wanted to change some things, which I was able to do. And it generates just a Word document. Great thing is it always spells the names right. But it's a very comprehensive document, and there's different templates, so you can generate a shorter will, more complicated will. It can pretty much draft any kind of document. And this platform is an app. It's cloud-based. I use it on my iPad a lot. If I'm going to a client's home, you can use it on an iPad. You can use it on your phone if you want, on your iPhone, and it works quite well actually on your iPhone as well. I think there was a question about probate tax and the calculation of probate tax. This thing automatically calculates probate tax based on the jurisdiction of the person. So if they're an Ontario resident, it's going to calculate probate tax. I'll just show you. You can see the probate tax going up as I do it. If they're a resident of, for example, Nova Scotia, they're going to be probate tax is going to be calculated on that basis. If they own land in BC, the land is going to be probate tax is going to be calculated on the land under BC law. So it's quite powerful in that sense.
Well, that's great. Last question: what would be your advice if a testator has signed with witnesses through video conference, but then dies before the witness has a chance to sign?
There's a major issue. I think, yeah, I mean, I guess you go to court and hope. I think there's a lot of case law that says that it's not valid because it hasn't been subscribed, even though the witness is watched. Now, you know, the case law was before obviously all this, but there is case law to say where a witness fails to subscribe, even when they were in the testator. If they fail to subscribe, it's not valid. So there's case law that hurts you, but who knows what a judge might do under these circumstances.
No, I agree. And I think it's a good question. And it's one of the things that why it opens us up to this idea of counterparts, because I think that may streamline the process and put an end to that one scenario. All right. Well, look, it's now a little after 9:30, and we'd like to keep these to an hour. We're planning to go back on next Friday, but if new legislation comes out, we're going to do a special webinar, and we'll certainly announce it. But as of right now, it's next Friday, same time, subject to change in the law if it happens. So thanks everyone for joining us. Everyone be safe and have a great day. Thanks again.
Thanks.